Good morning. Thank you, Jack. Good morning to everyone in the region. And if you're outside of the region, we're delighted to have this panel today. Thought we'd get started with sharing just a little bit what's been going on. As we all know, this has been an unprecedented time economically, and in a couple of the sectors, particular travel and tourism, and of course, urban transit, because of all of the stay-at-home orders, have been disproportionately affected. Obviously, these are important to the well-being of our region, as well as to the economic growth and societal connections. So we thought we'd get started, and Najee, if you want to go ahead and move forward. With a little bit of just what's been happening across the nation. A couple things. One is airline passenger demand is down over 90% year on year. To put that in context, you see on the left what happened right after September 11th, which was a decline of just around 20%. And in the financial crisis, it was a decline of 11%. So this is truly extraordinary. Obviously, as things start to reopen, it will move back up. But the question is, what's going to happen? The same is happening in transit, and Paul will talk a little bit about this, but you see a little less decline September 11th in the financial crisis, and then a wide range there. Sort of the best performing is a couple of the bus systems at the top, and then a couple of the rail systems are down 95%. So that's just the context of really how many people are showing up to the airports and showing up on buses and rail. The real question is we're all facing, if you go ahead and advance it, Najee, is what's going to happen going forward. And this is a airline travel demand scenario. The same question is with transit as well. And how fast is that recovery going to be? And we've just plotted out, there's many different scenarios, but as a firm, we have a few different scenarios around the likely economic rebound. And the economy's somewhere probably 2023, maybe early 2024, returning to pre-pandemic levels. Obviously, passenger demand is going to be somewhat flowing to that, probably more affected by the opening or reopening. But how deep is that trough going to be? What's that going to do to leisure travel? How safe will people feel? If there's a vaccine or more effective treatment, will it rebound faster? And these are the questions that we're all wrestling with, and we can see, and I think kind of tease up the conversation that we wanted to start with today. So if we go ahead, Najee, there's kind of four elements that I think each of these leaders are looking at. We just talked a little bit about demand and when's that going to come back. That's obviously a really important part. But what's the operating model? Many changes have already been made. What are additional changes to help people feel safe, both employees as well as passengers? The financial impact, and how do you have the resiliency for it? And capital project implications, both, potential ways to accelerate, which several of WMATA and MWAA have said they are accelerating some of those capital projects. It's easier to do them when there's not passengers, so part of the broader rebuild in those areas. But what's it do over time, and how do you think about it? So those are just the plannings happening in those areas. We'll dive into each of them with the leaders now. So I want to get us started and actually just start with Paul. What is your own passenger volumes, and what are you seeing, and have you started to see a bit of a rebound?
Thank you, Tom. Jack, thank you for organizing this. I'm glad to be part of it. Our passenger numbers are down dramatically, reflecting pretty much the extremes that you had in your chart. On rail, we are down 94%, and bus, we're down 78%. So year over year. So that's significant. It's about 78 million passengers less than we moved last year. Right now, that is basically has found its level and has been steady at those levels for about a month now almost. So that's where we are today. We project that that will continue. I'll get further into it, but we have a whole recovery plan. We see this as a gradual reopening and a gradual growth of our ridership.
And we'll come back to that reopening plan. For those of you who haven't seen it, WMATA released a reopening plan at the end of last week, and we do want to get into that in just a little bit, Paul. May I turn it to you, Ricky, and what are you seeing in passenger demands, and are you seeing any little recovery at all?
So yeah, thanks again for inviting me to participate in this panel. So when you look at our traffic going through our TSA checkpoints, which have been reduced to 2, by the way, our traffic is down about 93%. That's up, however, from about 97% just about a week or so ago. And so traffic is consistent with what you're seeing across the industry. However, as I noted, we do see some slight uptick in traffic, and so we're optimistic about that. But when you look at our traffic relative to the rest of the industry, so we were ranked the 22nd busiest airport in the industry just 3-4 months ago. We're now the 11th, right? Out of the top 50 airports in the country, our reduction ranks 47th out of 50. And so although that's, not a good news story, it does speak to the fact that although we've seen significant reductions, our reductions are less impactful relative to other airports in the industry.
And Jack, I'll let you also share and then just add a question for those who haven't been to an airport. Maybe just describe, if you showed up later this week and took a flight, what it's like.
Well, from a number standpoint, very comparable to what Ricky just said. We were down 97%. We were seeing a slight uptick. A good example, our low at Reagan was 641 passengers for a day. We're now up in the over 1,500. This weekend, we're expecting a little uptick in demand. If you came to an airport, you wouldn't recognize it. The bulk of our stores, concessions are closed. Restaurants, you cannot sit in a restaurant. Any retail type of store is shut down. And you will see markings throughout the airport. And so everyone's familiar with Reagan. Our North Pier is closed. American has taken their operations from the regional jet area, the 14 hard stands we have, and the North Pier, and they moved to the center pier. They're operating out of 8 gates. They fly less than 30 flights a day. And we have similar areas at Dulles that are literally just shut down. And again, I would say we're at about 20% of our stores are open. And you will see the bulk of people in our airports now are wearing masks. Some of the airlines are requiring masks on planes. And there is a movement now toward temperature checks. But when you think of airports, one of the things I think is important, Tom, for everyone to think about is we're part of a network. So as much work as we could do and as pristine as we could make our facilities, people are going to have to travel through a facility at another end. And so it's important that the entire network operate, and so, on a comparable plane so that people can build trust back up in our airports. But suffice it to say, it's literally a ghost town.
Mm-hmm. And maybe, Ricky, you can build on Jack's point, and maybe the two of you, I'm sure, working with other major airports, the top 25. What are the kind of system-wide plans to help people feel comfortable and safe that are being developed or discussed?
System-wide approach. I can't say that there are any system-wide plans in place today. The FAA and TSA are mulling as well as the airlines. A4A, they're mulling a number of approaches, including, does TSA do temperature scans, or do the airlines do temperature scans? So how do we, how does the industry on a standardized basis process passengers coming through the airport? I do want to piggyback on another point that Jack made in terms of what the airport looks and feels like. And so we've placed other restrictions at our airport. For example, you can only enter the terminal building if you are a ticketed passenger or a badged employee, as a part of our effort to manage this crisis. And so our checkpoints, because of reduced TSA staffing, we reduced our checkpoints to 2. We have 4 checkpoints in the airport. We have 2 that are currently open, and we have 2 exit lanes that are currently open. And so if you walk through our terminal, you will see a ghost town. And like Jack's point, we only have about 20% of our food and retail operators that are operating. I do want to commend them for having the courage to come into the airport and continue to provide those services to our customers. You will see face masks or face coverings throughout the airport, both for our customer service agents. Those are the airlines, those are the airports. And you'll see our law enforcement that is steadily working through the airport to make sure that, one, we're enforcing any restrictions that are in place, but also making sure that those that are using the airport are getting the services that they need.
If I could just piggyback on that, Tom, the other thing you're going to see is any place that there's an interaction between an airline employee, an airport employee, or any of our concessionaires and customers, you're going to find plexiglass throughout our systems to protect, the interaction. We call them sneeze guards, basically to protect both people who are involved in that interaction. You're going to see a lot of spacing, whether it's lines or circles, to try and keep people who are in any kind of a line, whether that's at a gate or going through TSA, keep them properly spaced to, for social distancing purposes. It really is a very different experience than you would have had before. We do have conveyance, like on buses, et cetera. We've done a lot to try and preclude people from having to get on crowded, put them in crowded situations. So at our airport, we've shut down our economy lots. We've shut down our distant employee parking lots, and we have everybody parking in our adjacent garages to the terminals so that they can park and walk, and we charge them the economy rate. So it is a vastly different experience, all geared toward trying to protect, the traveling public, protect, folks who have to work at the airport, and keep people safe.
Maybe just turn it to you, Paul. Maybe describe what it's like to get on a bus and get on the metro, and some of the changes you have already made dealing with the crisis.
Yeah, on the bus, our operators do have a plexiglass protection, which actually we've had in place for a number of years, so that helps. But we also have instituted rear door boarding only. We've actually chained off the front of the bus. They will still pick up people that need with a physical disability that needs to get on the front of the bus, but otherwise everyone gets on the rear of the bus. Fares are not being charged for that. The operators are allowed to skip stops if their bus becomes too crowded. A bus can basically, with social distancing, hold about 20 people, comfortably. So that's what we've been doing. We've been trying to focus our headways to get as many buses out there as possible, but we're dealing obviously with the staffing side and making sure that our staff stays safe. On the rail side, we've reduced the headways to 20-minute headways, and we have shut down the first and eighth cars on the rail cars, again, to protect the operator. The operator, in one direction is in the first car. When it turns around, he's on the eighth car, he or she's on the eighth car. So that's why we've done that. And it's a similar, experience if you're going into one of our rail stations. Very, very few people on the station. Primarily the people that need to move, that have no other access to a vehicle, need to get to hospitals, need to get to medicine related stores, and just basic stores and just some of the basics that they need for life. And that's basically what we've seen out there in our customer base.
So one of the things I mentioned earlier was, the crisis also creates a different opportunity, which is for you all to work on some of your important capital projects. And, we're imagining the better world when we're fully reopened. Just maybe describe what you've been able to accelerate, and I'll just keep with you, Paul, and then we'll go around.
Yeah, actually, our approach is twofold. First, we've got to make sure that we continue to do all the type of work we're doing, which is state of good repair work, making sure the system's safe. So that's our first priority. And to do that, we also have to recognize that we're working under different conditions. So again, keeping our employees safe and keeping our contractors safe. So what would have taken maybe an hour to do some work, maybe takes several hours now because of social distancing, how you set up, how you take down, all that's changed. And we see that continuing into the future. On the other hand, we are looking at opportunities to get things done, while obviously the impacts would be very minimal given the reduction of service, a reduction of employees, reduction of customers, 95%. So we are doing some things there. The first and foremost is we're about to do the platform work, as you know, on the Orange Line. We've decided to shut down everything west of Boston. That allows us to get in there and do the work to make sure we get the work done. It also takes pressure off our rail operations center, which is very tight in terms of the number of people. These are professional staff that take a year plus to get trained. So we have to be very careful to make sure that that unit does not go down. And then, so we've sort of split that operation up. So that reduces the amount of sort of complex work we would do in terms of moving trains. And that's another reason we've shut down. We were going to shut down the system west of Boston, the 23rd, actually. And then we also want to take advantage to do the work necessary to get to phase 2 of the Silver Line up and running. So we've been working with Jack and his people to do some of the final integration between the phase 1 and phase 2 work. So that also will occur at that same time. And so I understand for the number of people that we do impact, it is tough. We will have shuttle buses out there. That will not be an issue. We'll be able to run this very smoothly because of the reduction in traffic in terms of congestion, and also obviously the lack of passengers. So I think that should go fairly smoothly. There's some other opportunities we're looking at over the summer, where there's some other types of projects where we will do 1 to 2 weeks sort of shutdowns of a few stations between what we call interlockings. And then we can get in there and do some important work as well. Again, just taking advantage of the reduction in demand and also the opportunity to get ahead again where we can of some of these safety critical issues that we need to address.
Maybe building on that, Jack, obviously you have the Silver Line, you have the new terminal at Reagan that's also under construction, and maybe just share with folks how you're proceeding on those and other projects.
Well, I think, thank you, Paul, for mentioning the Silver Line. One of the things that I think is most advantageous to projects at the airport or for the rail is the fact that oftentimes we were trying to do those projects in very limited windows because we were dealing with, in our case, active roadways or active runways. And so the fact that we have this shutdown enables us to, expand the construction windows that we have. So for example, folks who have traveled to Reagan know that we have roadway closures that were occurring at night, and the construction was nighttime construction. We're now able to move that to the daytime. A lot of time was spent closing roads and doing setups. That's eliminated now, and we're able to do that during the day, making the construction much more productive than it had been. In addition to that, we were competing with other interests who were using, construction crews. Those crews have been freed up, and because we're an essential activity in Virginia, we were able to increase the number of crews that we had available to us again, but mindful of the fact that we had to change their processes and procedures in order to accomplish safe distancing and protect the folks that are working there. So in addition to that, we're paving parking lots that might have been scheduled to be paved a year from now. With the lack of parkers, it's a perfect time to go in and stripe a lot, to repave a lot. But doing something similar out on the ramp. We have a new concourse. We had a fuel line that we're going to have to dig across an active taxiway to be able to accomplish that, negatively impacting, aviation operations. So we've advanced that by 9 months, taking full advantage of the fact that American is shutting down their North Pier. And so that's under construction right now. So we're taking advantage of opportunities. I also, though, want to make sure that everyone understands this is not a free-for-all. We're not just, indiscriminately spending. We're very much concerned about our cash flow. And so we have delayed numerous of what I will call discretionary capital projects, but where strategically there's an advantage to accelerating it to take advantage of this unique situation that we find ourselves in. We are doing that, again, with the notion that we'll be back up and strong a year from now, and we don't want to disrupt the traveling public.
Ricky, maybe share what's going on your projects.
So as with any airport, we have hundreds of critical systems throughout the airport that are often difficult to maintain without creating some inconvenience for passengers when you have a terminal that's actively used. We're doing a lot of maintenance on those systems now because we just don't have the traffic here, and so it doesn't result in the inconvenience that we normally have working on those systems. About 4 months ago, we opened a new cargo facility for Amazon, a distribution center for Amazon, where they're ramping up to about 2,000 employees. So we've been busy helping them bring all those employees, badging those employees. But in addition to that, we have a taxiway that feeds and to support that system. And so it's been easier to get that project moved at a more aggressive rate because we haven't had to do airfield closures or contributory runway closures to support that construction work. Our 5-gate extension project for Concourse A is moving forward as scheduled. As a matter of fact, that is slated to open August of this year. I'm happy to say that our concessionaires that are also working with us on that project have been able to maintain schedule. This is in anticipation that at least a year from now, we expect traffic to come back at some level. A project that we're really proud of is we partnered with Southwest Airlines on a new aircraft maintenance facility that will be under construction later this year. But in order to launch that project, we had to complete an environmental assessment. The aspect of that environmental assessment that was outstanding was the public workshop. And as you know, with social distancing in place, it's discouraged to have public workshops. So we were able to work with the FAA to do what will be the first virtual public workshop as a part of a NEPA process in the country. And so we're going through the public notice process now. We expect to have a very successful public workshop. We expect to get a host of comments and contributions to our project, and we'll be able to keep the aircraft maintenance project on schedule.
Good. Tom, this is Paul. One other comment regarding construction program, capital program. That is the uncertainty on some of the supply materials, though. That is an issue that I think we may all be facing. I know we're facing, particularly on the technology side of the house. A lot of that equipment, a lot of that technology comes from overseas, and just given obviously the pipeline of that has changed. So some of these projects where today we may have an understanding of how we would do these schedule-wise, the reality is that may change over time as we deal with material and supply issues. So I think we all have to keep that in mind. We're doing our best projections, but the reality is, as in the global world we live in today, a lot of those supplies and materials come from overseas. So just keep that in mind as well.
So each of you had the thread of some of these projects were already in flight and funded, and so this gives you a chance to accelerate, but you also mentioned, we've had to be careful in managing, being good like steward and delaying some things. To the extent that you are comfortable sharing, what is the kind of financial forecast, and how are you all thinking about it, realizing that this is kind of the question that faces every entity, whether it's in government or in the private sector these days, but just kind of, in the interest of educating all of us, what's the kind of questions you're wrestling with financially? And maybe just start with you.
I'm sorry, but who, Tom?
Oh, start with you, Paul.
Okay, sorry. But yeah. So obviously, our biggest issue is our loss of revenue. And for fiscal year 20, which for us ends in June, basically we're down about $238 million. Our costs are up about 31. So the net cost is up about 31. We're saving obviously some of the cost in terms of energy, particularly electricity and fuel. But the revenue side is what's hurting us there. And then in 21, we're projecting another $438 million loss in 21, and a cost again of going up about 19 million. So in total, we're looking at almost pushing $800 million worth of additional / cost of revenue lost. So that's a huge nut for all of us. We're very fortunate. Our delegation has worked very hard to provide us with the CARES Act, which we will use to, it's a reimbursable project, reimbursable dollars, meaning it's not a grant that we just get the dollars. We have to show, the loss of dollars and or the increased cost to pull down those dollars. But because of that, we anticipate we will be able to manage the budget as we had defined earlier. Our goal is to reduce the subsidies coming from our local jurisdictions because of the pressure, the financial pressure they're under. So that is what we're trying to do, is maximize that those CARE Act dollars as much as we can. We also are looking to save dollars just through management actions. So we are doing a number of actions in that case as well. And the same way that Jack mentioned on the capital side, our focus has been on those capital projects that are safety, reliability based. So I think that will continue pretty much at the same level we've been in, because as you know, we've been in a catch-up mode for a number of years. So we don't see backing off of that. Again, we will take advantage of some of the lower ridership to do some of that work.
Maybe Jack, what is the kind of financial outlook for MWAA?
Well, the key for us is, what is the passenger level going to be for each of the next 2 years? And right now, Fitch has put out a kind of their projection that all airports will be at about 50% by the end of this year. Much of our revenue does come from, obviously, passengers, whether that's in the form of them using our stores and parking garages and other means of transportation to get to and from our airports, taxis. They all generate revenue for us. Airlines pay us, or people who fly pay a passenger facility charge, which is $4.50. That helps us cover our debt service. Airports throughout America, about 40% of what they spend, 40 to 60, is debt service. And so it's a fixed cost. It's not going to go away. It's not something that you can defer. It's an obligation that you have. And so our estimates are that we'll be down about $400 million this year. We're very fortunate that we have CARES Act money, as Paul referred to. In this case, there was some $10 billion set aside for airports. And we're getting some $229 million of that split between our two airports. In addition to that, we came in a very strong financial position. And so we will probably have to tap into some of our resources. The way funding works, or the budgets at an airport work, we have an obligation with such heavy debt for coverage of at least 25 to 125% of whatever your debt is. So you make money in a year and you carry it over into the following year. So we do have what we call net remaining revenue in the airport world that will help us close the gap for this year. The challenge will be for all next year is what happens with no CARES Act money available and without any net remaining revenue from this year. And so next year is really a critical year for our airport. And again, it'll be helped if we have a a healthy rebound, meaning if we get up to the 80–90% recovery, that would be great. On the other hand, we are building numerous scenarios as in terms of this year, we're looking at a scenario as low as only 30% passenger loads this year. And next year, we're looking at as low as 50%. So it really is very hard to be anything but flexible because we don't have enough information, and we're not smart enough to know how customers are going to behave, and none of us know whether or not there's going to be a resurgence in COVID come the fall. So we're going in this with in a very pragmatic way. We're being very diligent in doing our research, but we're not leaping to any kind of conclusion. We're staying flexible, and we're going to be very, very slow and deliberate, because any pronouncements would be, foolhardy at this stage of the game. We do know that there's a huge challenge, and we're doing much of what Paul described. We're tightening our belts as best we can. There are obligations, though, for us to keep our employees on board through the end of this calendar year as one of the requirements for the CARES Act fund. So we wouldn't want to do anything that would jeopardize receipt of that. So if folks wonder why I'm not saying we're cutting our workforce by 30%, well, it just is not practical to do that. And there is an obligation, in terms of the CARES Act money. So again, very slow, very deliberate. As I said earlier, the key here is what happens in terms of, let's call it consumer confidence in using any one of our facilities going forward. And I think people are going to look at it again from a network standpoint. So it's important that there's some synergies between how we all act when it comes to transportation.
Maybe Ricky, what is your financial projection and how the CARES Act is helping BWI?
So Tom, I'm going to take a slightly different angle. So if we generate typically about $200+ million a year in revenue. So when your traffic is down 95%, parking is down 95%. That's the largest revenue source that we get outside of the airlines. When you have that kind of drop in your traffic, then of course your PFCs are going to be down, your parking revenue is going to be down, your concessions revenues are going to be down. And so all of that is down for us, just as it is with every other airport. And we're taking measures to both tighten our belt and to prepare ourselves to sustain the revenues when they come back. I want to take a slightly different angle though, because when you talk about airport revenues, it's not just about the impact on the operator, right? The airport is a community, right? We have over 100 food and retail operators, for example, who are also impacted, and they're probably more severely impacted than we are. And so we've had to work with them on modifications to their lease agreements so that they can, survive, right? And so with our food and retail operators, we eliminated what's called the MAG, or the minimum annual guarantee. And so they're only paying us a percentage rent. Well, if you're not bringing any revenue in, then you're not paying any rent, right? And so we made that modification until January of next year, because we want to give them some time to come back and recover. With our airlines, well, you can't abate the airlines' fees and rents. And so what we've done is we've deferred any increase in their rates and charges until January. So come January, we'll do a reconciliation, and they'll pay us the difference if they owe us. And if we'll find ourselves in a dire situation in January, then we'll revisit that. And so we've done that kind of negotiation with all of our airport partners, including our rental car agencies, for example, just to make sure that whenever we get through this pandemic, our airport partners are in the best shape that they can be in to provide services to our customer base.
So one thing that, and you mentioned it, Ricky, that you're innovating how you're getting input on your environmental assessment. Maybe for each of you, just what's one or two examples of, in the crisis you've actually managed to innovate or do something differently that either you'd never thought of or you wanted to, but it had been delayed?
Well, I guess I'll jump in on that. I think we're all teleworking to some degree. Now, I will admit that I was not a huge fan of teleworking. I mean, I thought it had its place, but I was not a huge fan of teleworking. The workforce here has been as productive and as resilient as they've ever been. And I don't foresee how we move forward without virtual meetings, teleworking, modified work schedules having a significant role in how we operate. I mean, I think that is, for me at least, that's an eye-opening experience that is going to bring all kinds of benefits to this organization in terms of the amount of space that we need to populate our workforce, the way we achieve work-life balance, for example, and just how we get more productivity out of our employees. An employee who has to spend an hour driving to work, who can now fall out of his or her bed and start working, is a much more productive employee. And so for me, that's an innovation that I think will stick with us for a very long time.
Paul?
I'm not sure I would have categorized this as innovation, but one of the biggest things that's come out of this experience for us is the working relationship with our major unions, because it's taken quite a bit of effort to make sure that we've kept our people safe, and we've done that hand in hand with our major union leaders to do that. Took a lot on both sides to basically rethink how we do our work, clearly to put our employees first and foremost. But as you can imagine, that we have contracts with our different unions, and for them to show some of the flexibility that they've shown, and I think, and again on our side, to do the same thing. So I think that's something that will help us, going forward as we start to rethink the business, because I think going back to the old model is not going to work, whether it's telecommuting, as Ricky just mentioned, but literally some of the labor management sort of approaches that we've taken in the past just don't survive in the new world that we're going to be living in. So we're going to have to rethink that together. And I think we've gotten off to a very strong start on that. And so I think that will be, at the end of the day, that's good for the agency, it's good for our funding jurisdictions, and it's good for our employees. So I think that's a lasting thing that we'll get out of this.
Jack?
I would agree with both what Ricky and Paul said, that it probably has the biggest impact in terms of our employee base. I do think, though, that and there will be a changing dynamic in terms of the way, let's call it, America works. Now that's a double-edged sword. I think it has benefits for us in the workplace, but it has negative connotations for our businesses and for the rebound at airports, and obviously in Paul's case with buses and rail, because the more folks that are there work from home, the more meetings that are conducted like this versus somebody having to travel, whether it's across country or across town, that doesn't bode well for a full rebound back to 2019 levels for any of our businesses. And so it really has us rethinking what are our expectations going forward, and how are we going to construct our businesses going forward. So if demand is down, we'll have fewer flights, fewer passengers, less revenue. And so we are really focused on, yes, how do we take advantage of some of the opportunities that have been put in front of us, but are there longer term trends here that have been accelerated, as Ricky pointed out, that do have some negative connotations?
Before we turn it to the audience, Paul, your plan was released last week, which is comprehensive across many of these elements that we were just discussing. I want to give you a chance to just share kind of the highlights and some of the principles. And I think, as we all realize, it's a plan that is also subject to evolve because it is an uncertain situation. So also describe maybe how you're thinking about that.
Sure, thank you, Tim. Yeah, so we did present to our board last Thursday our recovery plan. And it really looks a year out into the future. And it was developed sort of both in terms of looking at what the 3 major jurisdictions are doing, the state of Maryland, the district, and the Commonwealth of Virginia, as well as the federal government, and trying to understand what they're doing, what we can do, and then obviously looking at the health and well-being of our employees and our customers. So that's what, that's sort of our starting point, is that we're going to make sure that our employees are safe and our customers are safe. And then we've got to think through, right now, how does this start to, do we start to bring back the service to the levels that we all want? Initially, what we're calling, what we call the stabilization stage, which is what we're in now, which is basically what we've seen. The passenger volumes have remained stable. The service level that we can provide is basically what you're seeing out there today. There's some things that we may be able to do, for instance, opening the 1st and 8th cars on the rail side as demand starts to pick up. But we see this lasting most likely through the summer, and would probably change at the beginning of the school year, depending upon what the schools do, whether it's the colleges and obviously the local schools. So that will change that. But right now, our thinking is that doesn't change until August, September, October timeframe, depending upon how things play out on the ground. Then we move into what we call managed reentry, which is, again, sort of what we see with the different phases that the 2 states have and the district has, where not everything comes back at once, but it gets turned on gradually. So we will do the same thing. We will start to increase, for instance, on rail service, we will double the headways that we're currently providing. On the bus service, we provide all the routes that we historically provided. So we would do things like that. And we see that lasting most likely until the beginning of next year, into the spring of next year, whether it's through a vaccine, whatever, whatever changes the dynamic out there where people feel more comfortable coming back and using the system. So that's when we would be back to full service. But I think picking up on Jack's point, there's some issues out there. Clearly, the changing dynamic in how people go to work and how they make trips and things of that sort. But also we have to deal with just the perception and the reality of some of the fears, whether it's using aviation or transit, and how that's going to influence the demand. So that is something that will play out over time. We'll get a sense of that. We have done extensive surveys of our customers and some focus groups. And some of the things we're hearing from them is they're more fearful of transit than they are going to the grocery store, for instance. It's a confined space. They're surrounded by lots of people in some cases, very tight space. I'm sure if the aviation community has done the same thing, that's probably what they're hearing from their customers as well. They want to see very active and visible cleaning for the system. We have done tremendous increase in our cleaning. We'll continue to do that, but they want to see it. It's not only that normally we do that at night so that we don't impact customers. Now they want the opposite. They physically want us to see us doing it. They also want facial coverings, which we mandated starting just yesterday on our system. They want social distancing. In our system, again, we are mass transit. By definition, we move lots of people in very short periods of time. So to do social distancing is quite the challenge. Basically, if we were to follow the strict social distancing rules, our capacity is cut to roughly 20%. Another way to look at that, we would need 5 times more employees and 5 times more equipment to maintain the social distancing at the levels of passengers we were moving last year. So that's the challenge we face. The plan is, the biggest issue in the plan is to show, that this is a gradual restart. Our objective is to try to keep the capacity slightly ahead of the demand where we can. Again, making sure that we keep our employees safe. But the other part of it is we cannot do this alone. We will need help from particularly the business community to basically meter how they bring back people, whether it's through telecommuting, whether it's through sharing or spreading out the hours, whether they do alternative work days, however they do it. Because if we come back with the peak hour surges that we have, obviously we're not going to be able to maintain social distancing. We can do things like put markings on our platforms and those types of issues. But again, just think of how people use transit. That's much more difficult than where you have a limited number of people, for instance, getting on a plane and you know what it is and you can monitor that. That's not how we operate. We don't know where people necessarily want to get on or get off. And that changes obviously stop to stop. And with the huge rail system and thousands upon thousands of bus stops to try to do that, we're going to need help of our customers. they're going to have to, do the things that we're asking, being facial coverings, maintaining social distancing. And I think the business community helping us out, and particularly the federal government, in how they bring back their workforce, since there's such a large portion of our customer base.
Great. Let's turn it to our audience who've been submitting some questions. I have Najia from the Board of Trade help out here. She's been kind of filtering them. So why don't you go ahead and start, Najia?
Thank you, Tom, and thanks for a great conversation so far. We've had some great questions come in via the chat box, so feel free to continue to submitting questions. We heard a lot about some of the disruptions and what this has done to your workplace with telework. I'm curious if you have seen any technology that has been helpful for your efforts to provide safety and confidence with your passengers, and are there any specific examples that you can share with us today? Paul, let's start with you.
In terms of, I think what we've seen, we actually have gotten this from our surveys. Our customers are very thankful for the service provided. They're very appreciative of our workers. They understand the risk that they're taking every day to be out there. They appreciate, obviously, the rear door boarding to keep them safe. I think in terms of the rail side, basically, the way that we're trying to do it is we're not looking to enforce some of these rules, but we're looking, again, for the cooperation of all of our customers to basically follow these for their own good and obviously for our customers' goods.
I'll jump in and just say that we've heard numerous compliments of our staff for, having put up, the shielding, for what they see in terms of the cleaning frequencies that are out there. And I think people right now are appreciating the fact that there's natural social distancing going on, but we do have markings. And so people are appreciative, and they can visibly see that we are taking the steps that Paul mentioned earlier, that they are coming to expect now in any place that they visit.
So we've surveyed our workforce a couple of times as well, and our employees, they always want information, right? They always want us to communicate with them, and now that they are remote, that they're distanced, that they are separated, communication has become more important than it's ever been. And so what we've gotten in our in terms of feedback from our surveys is that they appreciate the fact that we are aggressively informing them. We are inundating them with updates on what's going on at the airport. It appears to be this scary place, right? Because they're not here. And so they only know what's going on based on what they're hearing from other people. And so to the extent that we can, like we did a video walking through the terminal, they've seen videos of the terminal, and it's giving them a real sense as to what's going on in the airport, and that it's not this this spooky place that some may suggest that it is. And so just giving them information so that they can develop their own understanding as to what the environment is, what the work environment is. We've had employees that were just concerned about their own employment going forward. And so we've had to help them understand that, particularly as state employees, it's easy to lose sight of just how bad it is for employees that are not working for government, people that are in the private sector who've lost their jobs and that they're depending on the CARES Act and other unemployment compensation to keep them going. Just making sure that they maintain that perspective has also been beneficial to them, because as government employees, we tend to have a security that the private sector doesn't always have.
Thanks, Ricky. Next question. How is baggage handling working at the airports? Is this causing longer waits for checked bags?
I'll take that easy one first, Jack. We don't have as many bags to handle, so it's actually going quite well. But however, the baggage handling process is going to be one of those opportunities for exposure as we move forward. And so systems to sanitize luggage to make sure that people aren't grabbing contaminated luggage off of the carousel systems is something that I know our airport and other airports are looking at as well.
I think he said it all.
Thank you. Are there any quarantine protocols for any international passengers or passengers into the region from Hawaii?
I'm not familiar with anything in particular when it comes to Hawaii. In general, the CDC handles all of those issues. And so we at airports, we leave it up to state, federal, and local officials to make any health decisions and set any of those parameters. We as airport providers stay out of that business.
So nothing related to Hawaii, but we do have, based on CDC guidance and one of Governor Hogan's executive orders, we do require passengers coming in from New York, New Jersey, or Connecticut to self-quarantine for 14 days upon arrival.
Great, thank you, Ricky and Jack. Paul, has this accelerated your plans for an integrated app based on payment systems?
We are working on that very hard. Again, as I mentioned earlier, part of the challenge we're finding is, that's all done with outside vendors, and it depends on what they are. As you know, a lot of those vendors are on the West Coast, and they've been under some strict quarantine requirements. But yes, we continue to work very closely. It's one of the things, obviously, our customers want is a touchless system, and we're pushing very hard to get there as quickly as possible. But again, those are things that are beyond our control in terms of how they are doing their business, particularly again, some of the technology, some of the materials to support that. So that is a challenge that we're facing to try to get that done quicker. But we have a laser focus on that because we know that's what our customers want. So we are pushing very hard, and hopefully we'll get there as quickly as we can.
Thanks, Paul. Jack, you mentioned some projects that have been put on hold. Can you give some examples?
Examples of projects that, well, for example, we have some construction activity that for new facilities, we don't think the demand is going to be there. And so we've pushed that back. We've had some fuel upgrades for fuel lines that can be pushed back. There's nothing that is being pushed back that would be obvious to the traveling public is what I would describe to you. But in all, it's some $200 million worth of capital projects that we're able to push back 6 months to 18 months in order to help us with cash flow.
Thanks, Jack. How has the pandemic impacted your marketing strategies?
We haven't done as much marketing as we've done, I'll say, public relations or just general public communications. Just making sure that, and I think Jack and Paul both touched on this earlier, is helping the public understand the efforts that are underway to sanitize our facilities, and in Paul's case, his transit system and his rail cars. Getting that message out has been important to us because those are one of the concerns that we get from feedback that we get from our customers and airport employees as to what it is we're doing to sanitize the terminal. We've also done a lot of work to try and help the public understand that even though our employees are teleworking, that they're still working hard. And so we've used our social media platforms to push out examples of airport employees that are working in their home environment or in the airport environment. And also bringing emphasis to those employees who are putting themselves at risk, like our badge office employees who are clerical employees that never signed up to be first responders, if you will, but they find themselves in the middle of this pandemic providing badging services to the general public in our fire department, our police service, using our communication media to push those kinds of stories out, I think has gone a long way in helping the public understand what's going on in this environment.
I will just jump in and echo what Ricky said, as well as say that we are not spending any money on advertising right now. We are spending a lot of time communicating. We are very much focused on what we think our contribution is to the metropolitan area and to the local economies, and that is to connectivity between our area and the rest of the country, as well as the rest of the world. So our focus is also on airlines, making sure that they have confidence in our airports, that we're ready to handle them, to accommodate their transitions as they make their transitions back to whatever a new normal will be, whatever level that is. And so we're working hand in glove with them. And we feel that that is, in a very, very important area of focus. We want to emphasize to the airlines that we're going to work our tails off to want to make our airports the customers have confidence in our airports, but also focus on their profitability as well, because it's my opinion anyway that they're going to go and rebuild networks in a way that are going to be profitable to them, and we're going to bank on the fact that we are at the nation's capital. There's a very strong demographic throughout this metropolitan area, the entire DMV. And so this area is something that has to be served. And given, again, all the focus on government right now, connectivity to the nation's capital is extremely important.
Thanks, Jack. Just a few minutes before we close out and I turn it over to Jack, are there any last thoughts from you, Paul, Ricky, or Jack?
This is Paul. Yeah, I cannot thank the employees enough. I mean, when you consider, and Ricky just hit on this with his badging office, but when you consider our employees, and particularly our workforce comes from some of the hot zones within this region, is a reality. And for them to come in and maintain the level of commitment they have done is just amazing. And I think as a region, we should appreciate it. I know that there's many other sectors in the community that have done that, but I just really want to thank our employees. I just think they've done a fantastic job. And I want to thank the Board of Trade. I know that they are moving in a number of directions to help the region start to rethink how they're going to start back up. And I'm glad to be part of that as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Ricky, Jack, any last thoughts?
I just echo what Paul said. Our employees are fantastic. They're doing a phenomenal job. I want to thank the Board of Trade for their support, obviously helping us secure some funds, and also working collaboratively with us as we look to, as a community, recover from COVID. So thank you for your leadership, Jack, and the entire team.
Well, I'll reiterate what Paul and Jack said as well. What I'll add to that is, we've recovered from 9/11, and I think many would argue that we were better. We're better after that. We recovered from the Great Depression of 2008, and some would contend that, well, if you look at the economy 4 months ago, we were better, right? And, we'll be different after this, but we'll come out of this better as well. We'll be much more stronger, much more resilient, much more innovative. A lot of the stuff that you've heard the co-panel members talk about earlier today. And so it's important that we bring optimism into this other side of the pandemic. We are a consumer-driven economy. And to the extent that the consumer confidence is there, all of us will see traffic come back, and revenues will come back, and jobs will come back. And so I'm holding out hope that that will happen. I know we're working hard to make sure that when traffic comes back, we'll be prepared to handle that traffic, and we'll be able to handle that traffic in the same way people expected us to handle it in the past. So thank you, Board of Trade, for allowing me to serve on this panel.
Well, that's great. Paul and Ricky and Jack, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing some of your insights on what's going on. Tom, thanks for teeing things up. you know, it's really dramatic when you look at the impacts that we've seen when we compare it to September 11th and the mortgage meltdown and other financial crises that we faced. You know, Jack, you and I the other day, we were talking about the fact that, I mean, this hit us so fast, and the scope was so enormous to just really even try to wrap your head around it is extraordinary. And, you know, and I would just echo, it's been really impressive how fast so many organizations have been able to pivot and really, you know, come out and adapt to a lot of the challenges that we're facing, but also recognizing too, just how many across our communities are suffering, both from the health impacts as well as the economic impacts. And so it's really going to take all of us working together to get back on our feet and to try to do so in a safe manner and one that's as quick as possible. And so, you know, we certainly thank all of you for your tireless efforts. You know, these are thankless jobs, but greatly appreciated everything that you're doing, and anything that we can continue to do to help and support you, you know, let us know. We're here to do whatever we can. And so thank you again. And thank you everybody for joining. You know, I'd probably like to invite this panel to come back in a couple of months and update us. Where are things? What are we seeing? What kind of progress are we making? So plan on having that happen at some time. And with that, I wish everyone well and have a great day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.